Thanks for joining us. My name is Ibrahim Sani. This is Astro Awani. In the studio are two very distinguished guests. On my right is Munirah Khairuddin, the CEO and country head of Principal Malaysia, somebody that I've known for quite some time. And of course, to her right is Nurhisham Hussein, the evergreen, ever scary, I suppose, Chief Strategy Officer of our EPF right now, joining us in the studio. We're going to be talking about the balancing of savings for the future with looking at the immediate needs of what we need to do today and the impact as Malaysia turns into an aging society. We know that retirement crisis is already there. We're looking at how we can save ourselves in terms of at a personal, individual level, but of course at an industry level or a country level, how do we navigate that? Let's start with Munirah. We're looking at the idea of how Malaysians' savings are actually quite fast depleting post-pandemic. We're looking at inflation rate actually easing off. We're looking at consumer price index have also shown some slight recovery, especially one segment of it, which is food, where things are actually easing up as well. But I don't feel it. When I interviewed Maiden, he was actually, showing me the kind of numbers, chicken dah 9 ringgit 40 sen, but now it's 8 ringgit 40 sen. But I'm like, why am I paying, the shopping cart is still expensive. He blames me at where I shop. He says you blame Maiden. This is what, business owners are all about. So where are we situated right now when it comes to the economy? Are we really looking at a better outlook right now? And of course, how do you approach this whole retirement savings crisis right now?
I think you said it quite well. We have some glimmer of hope, but I think there's still many structural issues that is not fixed, and we really need to put our heads together. One of it is where you say inflation is tapering off. Structurally, we know it's not. Higher cost of living, and Malaysians' wage earn is not really at that competitive level. If you scan the region, I think our competitiveness is slightly diminishing, and so we really need to, I feel it's a structural problem with skills, and the inability to go higher up the value chain is also a structural issue. And when you can't go up higher the value chain, and the gig economy, actually what we see, the gig economy in Malaysia is a lot of lower income gig economy. So we need to go up that value chain, because wage can't go up if we are not pairing it up with the right skills.
All right, that's the idea. When we saw the Madani economy presentation by the Prime Minister last week, we saw that it's not just about raising the ceiling of the economy, it's also raising the floor of the economy, improving where we can stand when it comes to wages. There's an idea that progressive wage model is going to take place ahead of minimum wage. Isha, maybe you can chime in terms of where the direction is in terms of the plan of the country when it comes to the economy and actually addressing the retirement savings crisis right now.
Yeah, thanks, Ibrahim. I think we're quite happy with the announcement. I think it hit some of the key points that we have been trying to advocate as well. The big one for us, obviously, is the expansion of coverage for both EPF and SOCSO. But I think there are other plans afoot. I think in terms of really relooking at the entire social protection landscape for Malaysia, we need help. There are too many gaps. And I think there does need to be a reprioritization, I think, in terms of resources and creating that floor. Because if there's one thing that the pandemic showed us, is that our floor is full of holes. And we really need to fill those gaps.
The idea that we've been talking about is not just a sandwich generation, but a club sandwich generation. I am entering that stage right now, quite frankly. No longer a sandwich generation. And I would like to save more, but my wages aren't increasing as fast as I would like it to be. Maybe, Munirah, you can chime in terms of how people like me are going to manage our situation moving forward. It's not dire for me. Maybe not dire yet, but it will be soon. Yeah, so how do I approach things?
That's nice, like a club sandwich, right? Because really, I think we all need to reassess, affordability, in the sense that some, I wouldn't say tapering of your lifestyle, but debt. Debt levels are high, especially among young people. I don't know if you're in that club, but the debt levels are growing and high, and people are living beyond the means. So it takes a lot of education, but I think when your purse is tight, you are forced to think better and reallocate. But I'm not sure how clever people are in doing that, because they feel that they are in this debt trap, and they are in a high cost of living and wanting to maintain a certain lifestyle. So we were just talking about housing affordability. It's a whole structural issue on how to, really elevate the whole society. But for people like yourselves, right, I think discipline is key. It's not too late. Discipline is key in really prioritizing your, spend. And really, I think we need to be more vigilant in thinking where we want to get at retirement. Insurance coverage is key. Putting aside enough savings. Many people say they don't have enough emergency savings, but also put aside a little bit on your retirement, right, on top of your EPF, because we all know the statistics, it's not enough.
Let's talk about the statistics. EPF has just recently shared a very disturbing number, which is 9% of EPF members do not have not even a ringgit in their savings by the time they are 55.
Yep.
This number increased quite dramatically to 20% by the time you are 60, and 65 by the time you're 75. I think most 33% do not have not even a ringgit inside.
Yeah.
Having said that, those that do not fall into this category, just because you have a ringgit, you're falling into this category, which is not fair as well for us to understand what the numbers are. So, in short, we don't have retirement. So let's talk about some of the ideas that EPF is thinking about.
Yep.
Account 3 has been mulled.
Yep.
We carried that news here in Astro Awani. Of course, discussions are in place. Hopefully, those in the informal sector can subscribe to this notion. We don't know how it's going to play out. What else is being thought of at EPF right now when it comes to addressing retirement savings?
We have a lot of things on the cooking, if I can put it that way. Account 3 is just one of them. The monthly drawdown is another. There's a few other things that we are discussing with the government in terms of reform of the scheme. I think if we look at our work list, I think there's about 20 odd different reforms that we're looking at. I think that we're hoping to be able to roll out. But I think the key here is that we know that the situation is quite dire, right? A lot of these tweaks, a lot of these reforms will probably have incremental improvement in terms of retirement savings. So we need to think a little bit further than that. I think when we look at the entire landscape, I think in terms of retirement, there are significant challenges both at an individual as well as societal level. And it really does require a bit of a rethink, I think, in terms of what our arrangements are like. If you look at best practice in other countries, what happens is that they have a multi-layer system. Whereas here, we rely either on the civil service pension, if you're in the government, or you rely on EPF alone. And what we really need is to have some form of national, basic pension that covers everybody. So you get a very bare minimum. I mean, it doesn't have to be adequate, but what we were aiming for is that based on your own resources, based on what the government is able to provide, you have multiple income streams that can help support you in retirement.
Are you talking about UBI for retarees? Sorry, universal basic income?
I wouldn't call it a basic income because basic income implies adequacy.
Oh, so this is, you're not even talking about just adequacy, this is something.
Something, right? So what we have today, we have STR, which does provide a little bit on an annual basis.
Yeah.
Some of that can be repurposed for the elderly.
Yeah.
And children, so I don't leave that one out. We can also look at different forms of, I think, contributory systems. We can look at possibly expanding what we have in terms of social welfare. All of these require resources. All of these require, I think, some engagement with stakeholders because it does mean that we are changing the social contract. And I think that what it boils down to is that social contract. What we have today is obviously not sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
Can I chime in? I think the voluntary pillar is weak, and that's why we can't sustain this. In many economies or in many countries, and they realize it too late, and they want to push out on voluntary pension, and you can see in Latin America, even in the US, etc. Right, just to decouple away from mandatory is also essential. So to your point, right, the multiple sources of income or pension is key. I think private sector needs to play a far bigger role in fueling this voluntary pension. We say, we have a voluntary pension, but the market cap is not near where we want it to be. And that has to do with multiple factors, right? Because it's just a tax break. It's got to be more than that, right? So I think the government, we need to study how to strengthen the voluntary pension as well, so that, to Hisham's point, right, there's mandatory, there's voluntary, and many societies have survived that, or cushioned the impact of pension deficit, etc., with a voluntary pillar. So it's really necessary.
Okay, one area of concern that I want to explore with you, specifically Munirah, is on the appetite for investors, especially amongst individuals in the, can I say T20, are we still using that? Or the high net worth or affluent individuals. When it comes to your advice in terms of investment strategies and portfolio building for investors who are seeking to invest in opportunities for the current market situation, what will be some of the ideas that you can share with us?
Oh, okay. Before I get to the ideas, right, so the income gap is getting wider and wider, T20 and the rest of the country, right? But we see clear different, appetite in investments. So T20, I think the financial literacy is very high. In fact, many of the T20 are already investing abroad, and money is abroad.
Yes. I'm looking at Malaysia's gross national income per capita in USD. The lower middle income threshold was about 500 US in 1989. Now it's about 500 as well.
Yeah.
There's not much there.
Yeah.
For the upper middle income threshold, it was 2,000 US dollars in 1989. Now it's barely 4,000, slight increase. But the upper middle and high income threshold was 6,000 USD in 1989. Now it's more than double that at 13,000. But because the higher threshold is higher, the Malaysia GNI per capita also tracks upwards.
Yeah.
So if you look at the absolute numbers, I mean, I'm sure you're going to school me after this, but when you look at the numbers per capita, wow, okay, we're growing just fine. But when you slice it to the three income categories, it's really bad when it comes to the 80% of us.
Yeah.
So how do we? Yeah.
So you had a question on what are people looking at investments. So the T20 are already looking at global investments, alternative, offshore, right? And that's the thing, right? And many of the T20s have also, actually the upper echelon of T5 maybe, in the private banking segments in global markets. So we see that gap widening, and when someone like Principal, right, we're trying to also democratize investment and making it easier, but we do notice that journey is difficult because people are just, they say they don't have enough to even invest. What about safe, right? Safe pun tak cukup, and so how do they go to invest? So there's a long journey. And I don't think I should even answer, what are people investing? As I mentioned, people are investing in a lot of global solutions. And I think that GNI doesn't even take into account money offshore.
Of course it doesn't.
So the question is, right, if you look at Japan, right, anecdotally, Japanese equities have gone up, and part of it is Japanese money is coming back. Indonesia stock market is going up because Indonesian money is coming back on top of the world money. So the question is, how do we bring back some of Malaysian money and with that also, other outside money, foreign investors to come in. So that's a longer conversation.
It's not a long conversation. It's a question that we need to ask. But Hisham, let's explore that even further. So we're looking at 80% of Malaysian right now, looking at how they can think. Just psychology here. Think first in terms of saving and then investing. What would be some of the ideas that you can share with us when it comes to this point?
I put it at 97%.
97%, you're right.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot to be in the T20, by the way.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And when we're talking about people who actually have discretionary savings to invest, we're probably talking about T1, T3, something like that. I would say, I think the first thing to do, and I keep harping on this, have a plan, right? We know that, as an individual, you have certain life goals, you have certain life events that you have to take care of, whether it's marriage or having a house, having children, children's education. Those are relatively predictable, right? Yeah. And you need to have a plan for that.
I didn't predict my third child, but
yes, the accidents happen, but there are certain. So these things will happen, and you should have a plan for them, and you should have very conscious decisions around savings and investment around those events.
The thing is, when people have a plan, and I'm being serious now, it's very hard to stick to it.
Yeah.
There's COVID, there's loss of job, there's VSS suddenly, or MSS.
Right. And sorry, I was just listening to a commentary this morning, and it says no plan survives contact with the enemy. So, but the thing is, if you don't have a plan at all, there's no way you can progress towards those goals, right? Plans can change, and obviously, you know, we don't know what the future holds, and things will happen, right? But those plans need to be there in the first place, and you can evolve those plans depending on what happens. Right? But without a budget, without a financial plan, without even thinking around these things that you need to do across the entirety of your life, you know, you're not going to get to those goals, and you're not going to have enough when those things happen. Right?
Yeah.
And that includes retirement.
I can't agree more, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can divert from your plans, like how you run a company, right? You've got a budget. So you've got a budget and you've got to have the plan. You've got to put aside, you have 3 kids, you've got to put aside the education plan for them. And don't mix them up. You have your retirement, don't forget about yourselves, because your kids probably won't be able to afford to take care of you like how you're taking care of our parents, your parents, right? So I think some golden rule of, you know, 50 to 60, 60, 20, 20, something like that, right? You put aside, you have to have the discipline to put aside. Even if your investments or your savings of 20 erodes to a 5, think about how to get it back to 20.
The collaboration between the private and government sector is also quite crucial. We're looking at how the impact of the Malaysian economy as we turn into an aging society can be cushioned through some form of collaboration, private-public sector, some of collaboration in terms of what you mentioned just now, in terms of mandatory versus voluntary kind of notion of savings and investment. Where is the, I guess, the gelling factor going to be? Do you feel that it is top-down? Is it instructions from the government or policy? Or is it just trying to find greater collaboration amongst the private sector, seeing where they can actually get the greatest impact and then they try to strike a relationship with the government sector? How do you see this?
I think, in my view, right, policies on pension has to be strategic, and it has to be longer term. So we've had this voluntary pension, and we've been running a private retirement scheme, PRS, for like 10, 11 years, right? And the thing about it is top down.
Yeah, but people are not taking up on that.
Because
3,000 ringgit or 6,000 ringgit?
Yeah, so study other countries, right? How they run a voluntary pension, and there are many other ways, right? Like in Brazil, right? Your tax break is as much as you want to put into your voluntary. In the US as well, right? So you need to study, you know, how we take off the reliance from the government. I mean, EPF is great, but there's a lot of responsibility. So to Hisham's point, there needs to be many sources of income, many sources of retirement points. So it is top-down, plus bottom-up, and we need to work closely with the government in forming long-term policies that cannot change every few years.
We just had one last week, and it's supposed to stick with us for the next 10 years.
But I think that's just a framework, right? When we talk about the implementation, you know, there's a lot of other things that go into it. And
then there's also the execution risk, by the way.
Correct.
That it's, you know, okay, fine, we'll rally behind this plan now, fine. Yeah. But then in the execution, by the way, there's a lot of other stuff in between. Not just the economy madani. We're looking at the National Energy Transition Roadmap, 10-year plan. We're looking at the National Industry Master Plan, NIMP, 7-year plan. Macam-macam, 12 Malaysia plan, of course, 5-year plan ending 2 years from now.
But I think it's great because the lack of any signals wrongly as well that we're going to be ceteris paribus and declining. So it's good that we have a plan, a better plan that will take us to a better level, I hope.
Yeah.
But I think Malaysia's weakness has always been we're great at plans, we're not so great at execution. And I think the key here is actually how are we going to execute this vision? Yeah. Now that we have a direction, right? How are we going to pull our resources together to actually make it a reality? And I think given that we have some modicum of political stability at the moment, I think it's a little easier.
I agree. I completely agree with you on this point.
Yeah. So that
even with the state elections, it seems like things are settling down. We know who's going to take what.
Yeah. So there is at least over the next couple of years, we'll have some consistency. I think in terms of both policies as well as execution of those policies.
Okay.
And so hopefully we'll have some fruit out of this. You know,
Labour.
We'll have some stuff on the table within the next 2 years.
I do,
think.
however, find that there's better coherence now between the government and the private sector. One of the things that we're running, for example, EPF and a few other pension funds, right, who've really put in effort together with fund managers in, and we call ourselves Institutional Investor Council, right, where we really try to make change in the companies that we invest in, right? We really want to know your sustainability plan, and because where money is where we can assert influence, and we're managing a large amount of monies for the rakyat, and we need to assert that influence and pressure on the companies that we invest in. So I like that effort, because I think it will force private sector to make changes on sustainability.
Finding the delta in terms of investing requires us to take the bold measure of investing in places where it's most profitable for investors, institutional investors in particular. I've been a strong proponent of EPF investing overseas. However, there are some political noise in terms of why you guys too much investing overseas, but at the same time asking for greater returns in terms of yearly dividends. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. You want greater returns or you want to invest locally? Sometimes you have to ask that question. And seeing that, I'm not just talking about EPF, PNB as well, and other institutional investors are investing as much as possible in diversified geographies, diversified asset classes, and many more. Do you feel that this is going to be politicized even further by some sectors of the political community? Do you feel that that is going to be hampering the kind of notion of how these fund managers, folks like yourselves, in terms of trying to find greater value in terms of your investments?
Well, I think the politics aside, there is, given that we do have some policy direction at the moment, we do know what the issues are relating to the lack of domestic investment opportunities within Malaysia.
Yeah.
Right. We know what needs to be fixed in those areas.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of reducing red tape, in terms of providing some strategic direction for which areas that the government is looking at promoting.
Okay. Governance.
Governance. Well, those are the hygiene factors, so to speak. But the direction is very important.
Oh, okay.
I think pushing into new technologies is also very important. And I think the key here is creating an ecosystem where these businesses can actually grow, which I think is one of the areas that we have not done so well in.
Oh, okay.
Right? So we got a lot of money in the VC space. We got a lot of money at the public side, the public market side. So we have EPF and PNB and all that. There's a missing middle where you're talking about taking those startups, growing them, scaling them up, bringing them global, so to speak, or regional at the very least, because Malaysia is too small a market.
Funding onwards lah.
So we got funding at the end, funding at the beginning, but the funding in the middle, the expertise in the middle.
What are the matching grants supposed to be the idea?
It's not the money. It's not the money. It's the expertise. Because when you talk about scaling up, it's about somebody who can come in and say, okay, this is what you need to do in marketing, this is what you need to do in HR, this is what you need to do in terms of product development, this is what you need to do to penetrate bigger markets. Right? So that kind of support, I think, is really crucial, I think, in bringing the startups all the way up to the mezzanine space, get into that growth area, becoming unicorns, what have you, and then you go for listing. We don't have that pipeline. And I think that's the problem that we're facing today. It's a structural problem. It's not that either EPF or PNB or any of the other investors are reluctant to invest in Malaysia. It's that flow of assets coming out that makes it worthwhile to invest in.
But identifying the problem where the gaps are is a fantastic first step, no?
Yes, exactly. So if we recognize what the problem is, then at least we can take some steps in terms of fixing it. Right? So I think one of the things that I think MOF as well as MITI have been trying to do over the last couple of years is bringing private equity investors into Malaysia.
PE.
Yes, so the PE space is very important because they're the ones who actually are the bridge between the startup and the public market IPO side.
I was doing PE for 1 week, and then I ran out of the shop very fast. Yeah. I was a recruiter.
It's not easy.
And I'm like, this is a dead space. I ran out, and immediately I ran to debt capital markets.
Yeah.
That was then. I don't know. But PE is thriving elsewhere. It's not a dead space. It's thriving elsewhere. And of course, folks like you should be fantastic in PE.
I think we have to be clever, right? When you talk about strategic allocation, strategic asset allocation, we have to be clever, right? That, while the country fixes its structural issues, we need to invest offshore. And actually, I run pretty successful unit trust and mutual fund business. And you could see that, and this is pure open, right? Investors are choosing to invest abroad to the tune of 80-20 actually. So, you say that rakyat memilih, really, right? People are looking into returns for their income, for their retirement, for their savings elsewhere, but not really giving up hope on Malaysia. When you get a little glimmer, markets are up, people get really excited.
But it's also called salary reductions. I don't have much to say in that.
I want to talk about private equities, right? And unfortunately, if you want private equity money to come in, the benchmark is not just within Malaysia. It is really regionally.
Yes.
And there's so many attractive regional and global private equity propositions. And to Hisham's point, right, the skill, how sure are we some of the PE funds can get to their IPO and be run really well? And it's the differentiation, the value proposition, the technology behind it. Those are the things investors today are a lot more cleverer. Even Malaysian investors are very, very clever, very, very astute now.
Okay. Final comments before we conclude this conversation. Maybe Hisham, start off with you.
Well, I think when we look at that whole social protection landscape, I think it's not totally hopeless, right? I think the government recognizes the need for reform. I think the people recognize the need for reform. And we hope to be able to deliver on that within the next couple of years. Hopefully we'll be able to create a system that's a bit more fit for purpose. But I think we also need to educate a lot of Malaysians, I think, in terms of financial literacy, investment literacy, right? So that they can take control and more accountability over their own futures, because we can provide all the facilities.
I was about to say that. I mean, anywhere from AKPK to financial managers. You can even go to YouTube, which is not sanctioned by our regulators, and they give financial advice. But if you don't want to take that step, you just can't. You can't force people to drink water.
Ultimately, Malaysians have to take responsibility for themselves.
It's easier to blame, actually.
But the thing is, I think the help is there, the support is there if they need it. Right.
Munirah?
Yeah, I think I'll wrap it up by saying this is the era of personal financial responsibility. In any country that you go to, it's an era of personal financial responsibility. So you need to take charge of your future, your retirement plans, your family, and you cannot rely on the government to, dish out or, plan for you the structural reforms and then, by the way, I will benefit. It is an era of personal financial responsibility. Get yourself upskilled, get yourself educated, have more sources of income, have more sources of savings. And I think all is not lost.
Those are wise words, both from Nurhisham Hussein of EPF, where we need to think about social protection landscape. And in his own words, it's not totally hopeless. You need to find ways to try and upskill yourself. And Munirah of Principal Malaysia talking about how we need to upskill ourselves, educate ourselves, and find ourselves in a better position than we are today. These are the kind of ideas that we are exploring both at Niaga Awani as well as my show Notepad. You can find many of these kind of resources and upskill yourself and perhaps increase my ratings number as well by going to astroawani.com, look for Notepad or Niaga Awani or Ibrahim Sani. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.